The auctioneer read Lot 7B off the manifest at 9:53 in the morning, and the only hand that went up belonged to a man standing at the far edge of the crowd. $45. There was a pause, the kind that fills itself. Then the county procurement officer, a man named Dale Vickers, turned to the woman beside him and said something under his breath. And the woman laughed first, and then the men nearest her laughed, and that is the way a crowd does. They follow the laugh that is loudest, not the one that is right. The man who had bid said nothing. He took one step closer to the lot and looked at it. It was a Treasury lockbox, the kind issued to federal field offices during the late Depression years. 14 inches long, 9 inches wide, 7 inches deep, fabricated from 16-gauge steel with a double-pin hasp block and a riveted identification plate on the lid. The whole thing weighed, according to the sticker someone had placed on the side in grease pencil, 18 pounds. The exterior had oxidized from its original dark olive to a deep, mottled orange-brown, the color of creek clay after a hard rain. The hasp was seized. The identification plate had been painted over in black, twice, and then partially wire-brushed, so that 2 layers of paint and the original stenciling lay over each other in a pattern that looked, from any distance, like damage. From any distance. The man standing at the edge of the crowd was not at any distance. He was close enough to read the ghost of the original stenciling under the brush paint. 3 numbers and a district code. He had learned what that sequence meant a long time ago. It was June 14th, 1956. The auction was held outside the condemned Harwood County Federal Revenue Annex in Paulden, Missouri. The temperature was 81 degrees, and the air smelled of cut grass and old concrete dust from the building's broken foundation. 30 people had come. 29 of them saw a rusted box. His name was Walter Sims. He was 66 years old and 5 feet 8 inches tall, a man whose body showed the specific thinness of someone who had been active his whole life and had never eaten much. His shoulders were slightly rounded in the way of a man who had spent decades leaning over work surfaces. His hands were the most notable thing about him, wide across the palm, with short fingers and knuckles enlarged by arthritis that had come in on his right hand first in 1948 and his left hand by 1952. Under the nails of both hands there was a pale gray residue, the kind left by old paper and old ink, that washing removed for a few hours at a time, and nothing removed permanently. His eyes were dark brown, and he wore his reading glasses on top of his head unless he was working, at which point he settled them onto his nose with one finger in a motion so practiced it had become involuntary. He wore a short-sleeved cotton shirt, gray, with a small tear at the left shoulder seam that he had mended himself with thread that did not quite match. His trousers were dark blue, worn at both knees. His shoes were black leather, resoled 3 times. He had worked for 38 years as a federal inventory cataloger, the last man in Harwood County who still held the title, and one of only a few left in the state. His job, as it had been explained to him by the man who trained him, was to account for what the government issued, what the government used, and what the government lost track of. These 3 categories, in his experience, were never as separate as the form suggested. The man who trained him was named August Riker, a cataloger who had worked federal inventory since 1908 and who retired in 1934 with a handshake and a letter that no one read. August Riker had told Walter in the spring of 1918 that an item does not disappear when it goes unlisted. It waits to be found by whoever is paying attention. That was the philosophy Walter Sims had carried for 38 years. It was not abstract. It was practical. It described his work exactly. The modern federal inventory system had, by 1956, been centralized and computerized in a partial way that made field catalogers unnecessary in the opinion of most regional administrators. Walter had been formally reclassified as surplus staff in 1954. He still attended every county surplus auction in a 4-county radius. He still kept his own ledger. Nobody in 5 counties understood federal field office issue codes the way Walter Sims did. Nobody had for 20 years. Dale Vickers was 48 years old and built like a man who had played football in his 20s and had maintained the size without maintaining the conditioning. He stood 6 feet, even, broad through the chest and shoulders, with a thickness at the jaw that suggested permanence. He wore a short-sleeved dress shirt in a pale yellow, a brown tie loosened at the collar, and trousers with a sharp crease that had survived the morning. He drove a 1955 Oldsmobile 88 green and cream, which was parked where everyone arriving could see it. He was the Harwick County Procurement Officer, appointed in 1951, a position he took seriously and performed with genuine competence. He knew surplus law. He knew appraisal schedules. He did not know federal field office issue codes. And he did not know that he did not know this, which is a specific kind of certainty that is difficult to correct. When Walter's $45 bid closed on Lot 7B, Vickers had said to the woman beside him, the county assessor's secretary, a capable woman named Ruth Eller, that the old paperman had finally bid on something that would cost him more to haul away than it would ever return. He said the box was rusted through and probably empty, and that whatever was inside had turned to powder in 1942. Haute et la left. She was not unkind. She simply laughed because the man beside her had, and she had no reason not to. A younger man near the back, a hardware store owner named Pete Coulter, told his wife that evening that Walter Sims had always been a little odd and that this bid confirmed it. He said, "Man paid $45 for a brick of rust." He was wrong. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Walter Sims's are exactly who this channel was built for. Dale Vickers was not a dishonest man. He was not cruel. He was simply a man who had learned to measure the visible and had stopped there, and this is a common enough error that most people never have occasion to recognize it in themselves. The Harwick County Federal Revenue Annex had been constructed in 1931 as part of a Depression-era expansion of the Federal Revenue Field System, a network of small offices built across rural Missouri, Arkansas, and Kentucky to extend the reach of the Treasury Department into counties where federal tax compliance had historically been informal at best. The Paulden Annex served 3 counties. At its peak, in 1936, it employed 7 people. The man who sealed the lockbox was named Thomas Aldred. He was the Annex's senior field examiner, 51 years old in 1938, a careful and methodical man who had worked Treasury field offices since 1919. In the summer of 1938, Aldred was conducting a multi-county review of tax compliance records related to a set of Depression-era farm subsidy payments that had been distributed through the County Agricultural Board under disputed authorization. The records were sensitive. 3 county officials were under preliminary review. On the evening of August 23, 1938, Thomas Aldred placed the relevant documents into the Treasury lockbox, sealed it with a double-pin hasp, and stenciled his district code onto the lid. He locked it in the Annex's secondary storage room and filed a notice with the Regional Treasury Office in St. Louis indicating that the materials were secured pending his return from medical leave. He did not return. He suffered a stroke in September of 1938 and died in January of 1939. His notice in St. Louis was filed in a regional correspondence folder and cross-referenced to a case number that was administratively closed in 1941 when the Farm Subsidy Review was discontinued due to the war. The secondary storage room was used for general storage after Aldred's death, and the lockbox sat on a lower shelf behind boxes of form duplicates from 1935. Nobody moved it when the annex closed in 1944. Nobody moved it when the county took the building in 1947. Nobody moved it in 9 years of use as a county records annex. It had been there for 18 years when Walter Sims read its issue code in a parking lot in Paulden, Missouri, on a hot June morning, and raised his hand. Walter's own father had been a farmer in Harwick County. He had received one of the Depression-era subsidy payments in 1936. He had never known why. 2 years later, a letter had arrived from the Treasury asking him to document the payment. He had documented it. He had heard nothing more. He had died in 1949 with the question still open, in the mild, unresolved way of a man who does not expect answers from federal offices. Walter had not connected this history to the lockbox. He would not connect it until much later. He loaded the box into the bed of his truck himself, a 1949 Ford pickup, dark green over primer, with a wooden plank fitted across the bed rails to keep smaller items from sliding. The box was 18 pounds, and he lifted it without difficulty. He set it behind the cab and put a folded burlap sack under it. He drove home at 40 miles an hour on Route 61, 34 miles from Paulden to his property outside Mercer Crossing. The road was straight across the flatland, and the heat came up in slow waves off the blacktop. He did not rush. By the time he reached the county road that ran alongside his property, two of his neighbors had already heard. A woman named Greta Soul, who had been at the auction that morning to look at a set of decommissioned office tables, had stopped at the gas station on Route 61 and mentioned the old paper man bidding $45 for a rusted box. The station attendant had told the next three customers. One of them drove past Walter's driveway and saw the green truck parked by the shed and the old man carrying something inside, and that was enough for the story to spread another half mile. Walter put the box on his workbench, a solid plank table he had built in 1941 from salvaged lumber, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, with a lip at the front edge to keep things from sliding. The bench sat under a window that faced east and caught the afternoon light from the side, which was better for close work than overhead light. He set out his tools: a set of picks in a cloth roll, a tension bar, a can of penetrating oil, liquid wrench, half empty, a set of small punches, a wire brush, a magnifying glass. He turned off the radio. The shed was quiet except for the heat ticking in the corrugated roof. He sat on his stool and looked at the box for a while before he touched it. The Haas block was a double-pin mechanism, the kind used on Treasury field boxes of this issue period. He had opened 2 others in his career, one in 1943, one in 1951. Both had been empty. He sat with that thought for a moment. There was a reasonable chance this one was empty too. He had paid $45 for the district code, for the principle of it, for the same reason he had attended every surplus auction for 38 years. He was not sure this was enough reason. He sat with that for a moment too. Then he put his glasses on. He applied penetrating oil to the hasp pin and to the keyhole and let it work for 40 minutes. He went to the house for a glass of water and came back. The first attempt to pick the lock produced nothing. The pins had corroded into their housing. He applied more oil and worked a thin wire into the keyhole to distribute it. He waited another 25 minutes. The second attempt moved the front pin 1 position. He felt it through the pick. Not much, just a slight give, the way a gate feels when the latch is not seated fully. He worked the tension bar slowly and held the position and moved to the second pin. The second pin did not move. He stopped. He heated the hasp body with a small propane torch, holding the flame for 30 seconds, not long enough to damage anything inside, just enough to expand the metal around the pins by a few thousandths. He waited for it to cool. He applied oil again. He worked both pins together this time, which was harder with his right hand the way it was, the knuckle of the index finger swollen enough that the pick felt loose in his grip. At 4:17 in the afternoon, the double pin hasp released. The sound was smaller than a paperclip dropping on a desk. Just a faint internal tick, and then the hasp swung free on its rivet. He did not open the lid. He sat back on the stool. His right hand was aching from the index knuckle up to the wrist. He rested it on his knee. The shed was quiet, and the afternoon light came in at a low angle through the east window and lay across the box in a way that showed every pit and seam in the oxidized steel. He thought about August Riker, who had told him that an item does not disappear when it goes unlisted. He thought about 38 years of auctions and empty boxes and busted seals and nothing inside but old forms and rubber bands gone brittle with age. He lifted the lid. The air that came out was dry and still and smelled of old paper and something faintly sweet beneath it. Not rot, but the specific sweetness of carbon paper that has been sealed in metal for a long time. The air was cooler than the shed by several degrees. He felt it on his forearm. He looked inside without reaching. A stack of documents, 6 or 7 inches deep, paper-clipped in sections. A smaller envelope, sealed. And below the envelope, flat against the bottom of the box, would appear to be a cloth-wrapped object, narrow, about 8 inches long. He sat and looked at it. The afternoon light held. The roof ticked. Then he reached in. He lifted the documents out first. 11 sections, paper-clipped, each section bearing a Treasury field examination header from 1937 or 1938. He set each section on the bench before taking the next. They were depositor compliance reviews, farm subsidy payment records for 3 counties, cross-referenced against Agricultural Board authorization logs. Each section was stamped, pending regional review, do not distribute. He checked each one twice. The third section carried a name he recognized. His father's name. He stopped. He set the section down flat and looked at it. His father had received a subsidy payment in 1936 and had been asked to document it in 1938. Thomas Aldred had documented it here. Payment authorized, records verified, no discrepancy. His father had been cleared in a document that had never been submitted. The letter in 1938 had been followed by silence. The silence had never been explained. It was explained now. He sat for a while with that. Then he picked up the sealed envelope. Inside was Thomas Aldred's field summary, dated August 22nd, 1938, the day before he sealed the box. It named 2 Harwood County Agricultural Board officials who had authorized subsidy payments without federal clearance. The payments had been real, and the recipients had done nothing wrong. The fault lay with the board. The summary concluded, all farm recipients reviewed in this examination are hereby cleared of any compliance concern. The record is complete. Walter read that line twice. He folded the letter along its original creases and set it face down on the bench. He sat in the shed for 20 minutes. He heard a truck pass on the county road. He heard a bird in the elm tree by the fence. He heard the roof tick 3 more times as the afternoon cooled. Then he unwrapped the cloth from the object at the bottom of the box. It was a mechanical pencil, brass, with a Treasury Department seal engraved on the barrel. A personal item. Thomas Aldred had put in with the documents and had not come back for it. Walter set it on the bench beside the letter. He wiped his hands on his trousers. He put his glasses on top of his head. He went inside and started the kettle. He was at the Harwood County Courthouse at 8 the next morning with the documents in a file folder and a written cover sheet he had typed himself. He set them on the counter of the county clerk's office and said, "These are Treasury field examination records from 1938. They clear every farm recipient named in the Harwood County Subsidy Review. There are 2 county officials named for procedural violation. I'd like this entered into the county record." He left without further conversation. The county clerk contacted the Treasury Regional Office in St. Louis. The records were authenticated over the following 6 weeks. In September of 1956, the regional office issued a formal clearance notice for all farm recipients named in the 1937 to 1938 Harwood County Review. The 2 Agricultural Board officials named in Aldred's summary had both died, one in 1944, one in 1950, and no further action was taken. The clearance was published in the county administrative record. Dale Vickers read about it in the Paulding Courier. He was not a man given to long self-examination, but he was not dishonest either, and he spent some time in the following weeks thinking about what he knew how to read and what he did not. He did not change his methods substantially. He was quieter at the next 2 surplus auctions he attended, and the people who noticed this attributed it to other things. Walter Sims was offered a payment by the county clerk's office for the cost of recovering the documents. $45, which was what he'd paid at auction. He declined it. He had never been offered one and would have been embarrassed by either answer. Thomas Aldred's lockbox is kept today in the reading room of the Harwood County Historical Archive in Paulding, Missouri. The hasp hangs open on its rivet. The identification plate, cleaned of its paint layers, shows the original stenciling clearly. Children on school visits touch the hasp and ask what it locked. The volunteer docent tells them it locked a record that was not finished, that someone had sealed it with the intention of coming back, that someone else came back instead 38 years later and finished what had been started. The question is not what Dale Vickers saw when he looked at the box. He saw what most people would see, rust and weight, and no good reason for $45. The question is what you would have done if you had known how to read the code on the lid. If the name inside had been your father's. If you had spent 38 years showing up to places where everyone else had already decided there was nothing to find. Some records wait longer than the people who made them. The only thing that determines whether they are ever read is whether someone patient enough is still paying attention.